Fresh allegations claim that leaked emails exposed princesses Beatrice and Eugenie for receiving £20 million from Jeffrey Epstein. According to these reports, this wasn't a gift or a loan. It was allegedly hush money, payment for their silence about what they saw during their time in his orbit. The shocking part of these claims: that the palace knew, they all knew. And this evidence allegedly can't be ignored, but before we go any further, let's be absolutely clear, these are allegations. Claims, reports that have appeared in certain outlets but have not been independently verified by major news organizations. We don't know if this money actually changed hands, we don't have confirmed documentation. What we do have is a story that's circulating, and we need to examine it critically, what we actually know, the verified facts. Before we dive into the allegations, let's establish what is actually documented and verified. British tabloids have published emails sent by Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, the former wife of Prince Andrew. These emails appear to show Sarah Ferguson thanking disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein for their supreme friendship. These emails are real. They're from the Department of Justice files released in early 2026. We also know from verified sources that Sarah Ferguson called Epstein a legend in 2010. We know she wrote "Just marry me" in another message to him. We know she begged him for financial help with her rent. These are documented facts from official court records. We also know that Beatrice and Eugenie were taken to meet Epstein in 2009, 5 days after he was released from prison following his 2008 conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor. These young women were 20 and 19 years old at the time. These facts are established and verified. Now, with that foundation of what we actually know, let's examine the allegations about payments that have not been verified, the alleged payments, examining the claims. According to reports that have surfaced, there were allegedly communications between Epstein's financial advisors and representatives for the princesses dated between 2010 and 2019. This timeframe is significant because it's in the middle of multiple investigations into Epstein's activities. The allegations claim that payments weren't made all at once, but were split into multiple wire transfers routed through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland, allegedly to avoid detection. But here's where we need to pause and ask questions. Where is this information coming from? Who has access to these financial records? How would anyone outside Epstein's inner financial circle know the specific details of wire transfers? These are questions that need answering before we accept these claims as fact. The alleged email language: the reports claim that the language in these alleged emails gives everything away. One message allegedly from 2012 references keeping the York girls happy and cooperative. Another allegedly from 2015 discusses continued discretion in exchange for financial support. A 2017 email allegedly explicitly mentions silence regarding previous visits and activities. Now, these are very specific claims. If these emails exist and contain this language, they would be devastating evidence. But we haven't seen these emails published by major news organizations. We haven't seen them verified by law enforcement. We have reports that claim they exist, but the actual documentation hasn't been made public in the way that Sarah Ferguson's other emails to Epstein were. This is a crucial distinction. Sarah Ferguson's "Just marry me" email, we've seen it. It's in the DOJ files, these alleged payment coordination emails. We haven't seen them independently verified, the alleged £20 million. The total alleged amount is £20 million, supposedly split roughly equally between Beatrice and Eugenie or paid through their mother. That's an enormous sum of money. And according to these allegations, the timing of these payments lines up perfectly with key moments in the Epstein investigations, right before victims came forward, right before documentaries aired, right before court cases intensified. The narrative being presented is that every time the spotlight got brighter on Epstein, money moved to the princesses. The claim is that this isn't coincidence, it's strategy. But again, we need to ask, where is the evidence? Bank records, wire transfer documentation, testimony from financial institutions. Without this evidence, we're dealing with allegations, not proven facts. Sarah Ferguson's documented role. What we can document is Sarah Ferguson's role as intermediary between Epstein and her daughters. The verified emails show her coordinating meetings, facilitating contact, acting as a go-between. We know from official court records that she emailed Epstein about bringing her daughters to visit. We know she made that shocking comment about Eugenie having a shagging weekend in an email to Epstein. Let's pause on that verified email for a moment because it's genuinely disturbing. Sarah Ferguson, in an email to Jeffrey Epstein, a convicted sex offender, wrote, "Not sure yet. Just waiting for Eugenie to come back from a shagging weekend. This is documented. This is real. This is Sarah Ferguson discussing her 19-year-old daughter's private life with a man who had been convicted of soliciting a minor." The wording alone has shocked readers, but the context makes it even more jarring. This isn't a protective mother. This is someone who had completely inappropriate boundaries with a dangerous man, and she was bringing her daughters into his orbit. The question of what they saw, whether or not the £20 million payment allegations are true, we have to confront an uncomfortable reality. Beatrice and Eugenie were brought into Jeffrey Epstein's world by their mother. They visited his properties, they flew on his plane. They spent time in his circle. Did they see things? Almost certainly, you don't spend time at Epstein's homes, on his properties, around his circle and see nothing. The allegations reference previous visits and activities that needed to stay private. They mention sensitive information that could be damaging if disclosed. So the question is, what information, what activities? If the alleged emails are real, they don't spell it out explicitly, but the narrative suggests that the amount of money allegedly involved tells you everything you need to know. The claim is that you don't pay £20 million to keep someone quiet about nothing, and there's logic to that argument. But we still need evidence that this money actually changed hands before we can accept that premise. What the PINCSSES might have WITNESSED. Let's think about this logically, based on what we know Beatrice and Eugenie actually did. They met Epstein in 2009, 5 days after his release from a facility where he'd served time for soliciting a minor. What were they told about him? Did their mother explain his conviction? Did they know what he'd done? They were 19 and 20 years old. Not children, but young women who presumably trusted their mother's judgment about who was safe to be around. If Sarah Ferguson told them Epstein was a family friend who'd been wrongly accused, they might have believed her. If she minimized his crimes, they might not have understood the danger, but they were also old enough to observe. If there were young women at Epstein's properties who looked uncomfortable, if there were inappropriate dynamics they witnessed, if there were things that didn't sit right with them, they would have been old enough to process that something was wrong, even if they didn't fully understand the scope of what Epstein was doing. The insider accounts. One insider allegedly told the Daily Mail that the princesses were mortified by what their mother had written in the emails that were verified and released. The source said the sisters were particularly shaken by references to their private lives, like that shagging weekend comment. The source claimed they had not been fully aware of just how close their parents' relationship with Epstein appeared to be. If this account is accurate, it suggests the sisters were kept somewhat in the dark about the depth of the Epstein connection, but it also raises questions. How could they not know? They were theirs. They met him, they spent time with him. At what point does "we didn't know" become harder to believe? The palace's alleged knowledge. The allegations claim that the palace knew about the payments. The argument is that £20 million doesn't move through accounts connected to British royals without Buckingham Palace being aware. Financial advisors and royal protection officers would have known. And they all allegedly stayed quiet because protecting Beatrice and Eugenie meant protecting the monarchy, avoiding another Andrew situation, keeping the Epstein scandal as far from the throne as possible. This is where the allegations become conspiracy theory territory. The claim is that the palace let it happen, let the silence continue, and when victims came forward, when documentaries exposed the truth, the palace put out statements about how deeply concerned they were. But they allegedly weren't concerned enough to ask Beatrice and Eugenie what they knew. Now this narrative assumes a level of coordination and cover-up that would involve dozens of people across multiple institutions. It assumes everyone stayed silent. Everyone participated in the cover-up. Everyone prioritized protecting the princesses over justice for victims. Is that possible? In theory, yes. Is it proven? No. Why would Epstein pay? Let's examine the logic of the alleged payments from Epstein's perspective. Why would he pay £20 million to two princesses? The argument presented is simple because they were there. Beatrice and Eugenie weren't just casual acquaintances of Epstein's. Their mother brought them into his world when they were teenagers and young adults. She took them to his properties in 2010, just months after his conviction. From Epstein's perspective, if the princesses had witnessed things that could be damaging, paying for their silence would make strategic sense. These aren't random witnesses. These are members of the British royal family. If they went public with allegations about what they saw, it would be international news. It would be devastating to whatever reputation Epstein had left. It would potentially expose other powerful people in his network. So the motive for Epstein to pay would be clear. The question is whether he actually did pay, and we don't have verified evidence of that yet. Sarah Ferguson as broker. The allegations paint Sarah Ferguson as the broker of whatever deal might have existed. We know she was desperate for money. This is documented. Divorced from Andrew, cut off from royal funds, drowning in debt. In 2010, we know she emailed Epstein begging for help with rent. She called him a legend for helping her. She told him, "Just marry me," in another message. So she saw Epstein as a solution to her financial problems. That's established fact. The allegations then suggest she had two valuable assets, her daughters. Royal princesses with access to elite circles. So she allegedly brokered a deal. The claimed emails show her discussing payment structures, ensuring continued cooperation. The most disturbing part of all of this, whether the payment allegations are true or not, is that verified email about Eugenie's shagging weekend. That's not a protective mother. That's someone who saw her daughters as currency in some way. That's someone with completely inappropriate boundaries around a convicted sex offender. The silence from the PINCSSES. Here's what we can observe: Beatrice and Eugenie haven't said a word about any of this. No statements from their representatives. No denials about the payment allegations. No legal action to dispute leaked documents if they're false. Just silence. Now that silence can be interpreted multiple ways. Maybe they're staying silent because the allegations are true and they can't deny them without committing perjury. Maybe they're staying silent because their lawyers have advised them not to comment during ongoing investigations. Maybe they're staying silent because they're traumatized and don't know how to respond. Maybe they're staying silent because they're protecting their parents despite everything. The silence is notable, but it's not proof of guilt. It's just silence. And people stay silent for many reasons. The victim's perspective. Meanwhile, victims of Epstein are still fighting for justice. Still trying to hold people accountable. Still trying to expose everyone who enabled him. These women have been brave enough to come forward to tell their stories, to face their abusers in court or in the court of public opinion. And if the allegations about Beatrice and Eugenie are true, if they did witness things and accepted money to stay quiet, that would be a profound betrayal of those victims. Two British princesses who could have helped by speaking up, using their platform and their privilege to do the right thing, allegedly chose £20 million instead. But again, we need to be careful here. We don't know what they witnessed. We don't know if they understood what they were seeing. We don't know if money actually changed hands. We don't know if they were victims themselves in some way, manipulated by their mother into situations they didn't fully understand. The documentation question. Let's return to the fundamental question: where is the evidence for these payment allegations? The reports claim emails exist. They claim financial records exist. They claim wire transfers happened through offshore accounts. But where's the documentation? When Sarah Ferguson's Just Marry Me email came out, we saw it. It was in official DOJ files. It was reported by mainstream media. It was undeniable. These alleged payment emails. They're being described, quoted, referenced. But we haven't seen them verified by major news organizations. This doesn't mean they don't exist. It means we should be cautious about accepting them as fact until we have better evidence. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Those financial systems have privacy protections. How would anyone outside those systems know the details unless they're part of law enforcement with subpoena power? The palace's alleged protection. The narrative suggests the royal family will protect Beatrice and Eugenie no matter what. That the palace will spin this and the media will move on to the next scandal. And there's truth to that pattern. The royal family has historically protected its members, sometimes at great cost to its own credibility. Look at how long they protected Andrews. Look at how many years they allowed him to operate with questionable associations. Look at how they tried to manage the Epstein scandal with PR rather than transparency. So the allegation that they would protect Beatrice and Eugenie, even if these payment claims are true, is consistent with past behavior. But that doesn't make the specific allegations true. It just means we know the palace has form for protecting family members. The Cayman Islands and Swiss accounts. Let's talk about these alleged offshore accounts. The Cayman Islands and Switzerland are classic locations for hiding money. They have strong banking privacy laws. They're used by wealthy people around the world to shield assets from taxation and scrutiny. If Epstein wanted to make payments that couldn't be easily traced, those would be logical locations to route money through. But here's the thing, those same privacy protections that make them attractive for hiding money also make it difficult for outsiders to know what's in those accounts. Law enforcement with proper legal authority can pierce that veil. But random sources? How would they have this information? This is why we need to see verified evidence. If prosecutors have obtained these financial records through subpoena, that's one thing. If someone is claiming to have seen records without explaining how they got access to highly protected financial information, that's another thing entirely. The timeline correlation. One of the most compelling aspects of the allegations is the timeline. The claims suggest that payments to the princesses lined up with key moments in the Epstein investigations. Right before victims came forward publicly. Right before major documentaries aired. Right before court cases intensified. If this timeline can be verified, it would be damning. It would suggest a clear pattern of paying for silence at moments when that silence was most valuable. But again, we need to see the actual financial records to verify this timeline. It's worth noting that Epstein had multiple people in his orbit. He allegedly paid various individuals for various reasons. Some payments might have been legitimate business transactions. Some might have been gifts. Some might have been hush money. Without seeing the specific records for Beatrice and Eugenie, we can't know which category these alleged payments fall into. The moral question. Let's set aside the question of whether the payments happened and ask a different question. If Beatrice and Eugenie witnessed things during their time in Epstein's orbit, what was their moral obligation? They were young. They were brought there by their mothers. They may not have fully understood what they were seeing. But at some point, especially as they got older, especially as Epstein's crimes became more publicly known, they would have had to confront what they'd witnessed. If they saw young women in distress, if they saw inappropriate dynamics, if they knew things that could help victims or prosecutors, what should they have done? This is a genuinely difficult question. They weren't law enforcement. They weren't required by law to report things unless they witnessed specific crimes. They were protecting their family, their mother, their father, themselves. They had their own careers, their own lives, their own children to think about. But they're also members of one of the most privileged families in the world. They have platforms. They have resources. They could have spoken up without fear of not being believed or being dismissed. If they chose silence for whatever reason, that's a choice with moral weight. The mother's failures. Whether or not these payment allegations are true, one thing is absolutely clear: Sarah Ferguson failed her daughters. She brought them into contact with a convicted sex offender. She maintained an inappropriate relationship with that offender. She made crude comments about her daughter's private life to him. She put her own financial needs ahead of her daughter's safety and well-being. That's not speculation. That's based on verified facts from released emails and documented meetings. Sarah Ferguson is responsible for whatever position her daughters find themselves in today. They were teenagers and young adults when she brought them into Epstein's orbit. They trusted her judgment, and she betrayed that trust. The question of complicity. At what point do Beatrice and Eugenie bear responsibility for their own choices as adults? They're now in their 30s. They've been adults for over a decade since meeting Epstein. If they witnessed things, if they had information, at what point did it become their responsibility to come forward? This is where opinions will differ sharply. Some will say they were victims of their mother's terrible judgment and shouldn't be blamed. Others will say that as adults with enormous privilege and platform, they had an obligation to speak up, especially once Epstein's crimes became widely known. Both perspectives have merit. The truth is probably somewhere in between. They were put in a terrible position by their mother. But they've also had years to decide how to respond to that position. The palace's impossible situation. If these allegations are true, the palace is in an impossible situation. They can't defend payments to silence witnesses. They can't explain away that kind of behavior. But they also can't throw Beatrice and Eugenie under the bus without causing enormous damage to the institution. So they stay silent. They don't confirm or deny. They let the allegations swirl and hope they blow over. It's a strategy that's worked before. But in the age of social media and persistent investigation, it might not work this time. The legal implications. If these payments happened and can be proven, what are the legal implications? In the UK, paying for silence about crimes could potentially constitute obstruction of justice or conspiracy. But that would require proof that the payments were specifically to suppress evidence or testimony related to criminal activity. If the payments were characterized as something else, gifts, loans, business transactions, that would be harder to prosecute. This is why the actual documentation matters so much. The language in the alleged emails, if they exist, could determine whether this was a crime or just deeply unethical behavior. Why this story matters? Whether or not these specific payment allegations are true, this story matters because it's about accountability. It's about whether the wealthy and powerful can buy silence. It's about whether victims of Epstein will ever see full justice. It's about whether the royal family can continue to operate with limited transparency and public accountability. The verified facts alone that Sarah Ferguson maintained a close relationship with Epstein after his conviction, that she brought her daughters to meet him, that she made inappropriate comments about her daughters to him, those facts alone are damaging enough. The payment allegations, if true, would take this to another level entirely. The evidence we are still waiting for. We need to see verified financial records. We need major news organizations with investigative resources to confirm or deny these allegations. We need law enforcement to either charge people based on evidence or publicly clear them. What we can't do is accept allegations as facts just because they fit a narrative or confirm our suspicions about the wealthy and powerful. Epstein's crimes were real. The suffering he caused was real. The people who enabled him should be held accountable. But we need evidence to determine who those people are and what level of accountability they deserve. The unanswered questions. The allegations about £20 million in payments to Beatrice and Eugenie are explosive. If true, they represent a profound betrayal of Epstein's victims and a stain on the British royal family that may never wash clean. But as of now, these remain allegations. Claims that have circulated but not been verified by major news organizations or law enforcement. What we do know is damning enough. Sarah Ferguson maintained an inappropriate relationship with Jeffrey Epstein after his conviction. She brought her daughters into his orbit. She made crude comments about her daughter's private life to a convicted sex offender. She clearly saw Epstein as a financial resource to solve her problems. Beatrice and Eugenie were put in a terrible position by their mother. Whatever they witnessed, whatever they knew, they were brought into that situation as teenagers and young adults by a parent who should have protected them. Whether they then made choices as adults to stay silent in exchange for money, we don't yet know for certain. The palace has questions to answer about what they knew and when. The princesses have questions to answer about what they witnessed and why they've stayed silent. Sarah Ferguson has questions to answer about literally everything she did in relation to Epstein. But until we see verified evidence of these alleged payments, we have to hold our judgment in suspension. We can condemn what we know to be truth. We can demand accountability for verified actions. We can call for transparency and investigation. But we can't treat unverified allegations as proven facts, no matter how much they might fit our expectations about how the powerful operate. The truth matters. Evidence matters. Justice matters. And justice requires that we base our conclusions on evidence, not just on narratives that confirm what we already believe about the wealthy and powerful. If these payments happened, the evidence will emerge. If they didn't, these allegations do enormous damage to people who may be innocent of this specific claim, even if their family's association with Epstein was deeply problematic in other ways. The story is far from over. More will emerge. But let's wait for evidence before we render final judgment.